Once a young man graduated from college brilliantly and hoped very much that his father would give him a significant present for this. The son was sure that his dad would definitely present him a car for the excellent academic achievements. That is why, for several months before the graduation, he has been admiring unceasingly a beautiful sports car in one of the dealership centers, and drew his father's attention to this car casually. And finally, his last day at college has come. In the morning, a few hours before the graduation ceremony, the father invited his son to take a walk and discuss something. Being in expectation of receiving the long-desired gift, the young man agreed gladly. Father and son were walking slowly along the shady alley of the park, just shooting the breeze. The boy was overwhelmed with the emotions. He was ready to just explode from the joy that filled his soul. "Well, come on, tell me about the long-expected gift. I want to hear about my beautiful new car. Come on, Dad, just tell me already," the young man kept saying in his mind, but his father still remained cool. Finally, the man started talking about taking pride in his boy and the real pleasure to have such a smart and purposeful son. He said that he had no doubt that his son would have a wonderful future, both in the career and his personal life. During this conversation, they reached home, and at the end of this touching speech, the father told his son how much he loved him, and handed a beautiful box wrapped in the presentation paper. The young man tore the paper with trembling hands and opened the box quickly. But then he could not conceal his disappointment, and a dissatisfied sigh burst out from his chest. There was a beautiful leather-bound book in the box. "You have so much money, but for my graduation, you give me a simple book?" the young man said angrily. He threw the book onto the table and ran out of the house. Many years have passed, but since that time, the son has never talked to his father again. The young man grew up, became a successful businessman, got his own family, and bought a big house in another city. And it seemed that everything went well, but there was something that still haunted his mind. He finally realized that he was doing something wrong and called in memory the day when he had a row with his father. The young man decided that he had to visit his dad and talk to him. He came to the house of his childhood from where he had once ran out in anger. As soon as he crossed the threshold, a sudden sadness and regret swept over him. The house was empty. On the table, a young man found a note from his father. It said that his father had moved to another country long ago and left the house to his son. The young man wandered around the rooms, turning over old things, and suddenly stumbled upon the same book which was given to him by his father many years ago. He began to leaf through it, thinking about his father and his own bad behavior that moment. Turning the last page, the young man froze in surprise. Keys and car papers were glued to it with the tape for that very car he wanted so much. A bill attached next to it said that the car was bought 20 years ago. We often receive gifts from life, but do not notice them just because they are packed not in the way we expected. Try to recognize at once what fate gives us, no matter how strange her gifts can seem. A pretty young woman stood at the shop windows looking at the new phones. Even if she had a second job, she didn't have enough money to get the latest model of the phone. She pointed to the previous model of the phone and asked to wrap it in Christmas paper. Waiting for the evening, she was so excited to see his happy 14-year-old son, and when she would present the gift to him at the dinner. The son unrolled the paper, and seeing the box, he wasn't happy. The mother froze. Did she miss something or chose the wrong color? "Darling, is something wrong?" Mom asked. "This is not the new model," said the son angrily. "How do you not understand what it's like to have this phone when everyone in class has the latest models?" She apologized and said that for the moment she couldn't afford that particular phone. And most importantly, this one was no worse. He said that he was a child and that was not his problem. And if the mother had not divorced her father and saved the family like other children at school, then they could have afforded everything. He got up and left the apartment. She looked after him and cried. With resentful look, he was going down the stairs when he met their neighbor, Mr. James. Mr. James smiled at the boy, wishing him a Merry Christmas. The boy grunted something back. Mr. James was a former police officer who's always been good to their family. He asked the boy to go for a walk with him and tell him what he was upset about. And he told his story. Mr. James smiled sadly and pointed to the bench where they sat down. Mr. James said that he will tell him something, but he must promise that his mother will not know about this conversation. He said that he knew the boy's father. He was an ordinary man, but he was laid off at work. And unfortunately, failures and weakness pushed him to take drugs. It was easier that way, wasn't it? Your mother, Mr. James continued, fought to the last. She would send him for treatment, get into debt, but your father always broke down. He started taking money and things out of the house to get another dose. Mr. James paused, and then he continued. The last straw was your father's attempt to take a new can of baby food and a pack of diapers out of the house. Then your mother packed everything and left the home with you. Mr. James said that later his father was arrested. But what amazed Mr. James was that the boy's mother never said anything bad or complained about his father. She works 2 jobs. The boy has clothes on him, lives in a good district, and has never seen any violence from a drug addict parent. It is worthy of respect. The boy was speechless. He excused himself and ran home. Tears rolled down his cheeks. He ran into the apartment and hugged his mother. He cried and asked for forgiveness for his behavior and promised that he would never offend her again and would not allow anyone to do that. Since that evening on, he realized that he had taken his life for granted and had not appreciated his mother's efforts to live the way he was living. A highly respected math professor worked at one famous university. One day, after a lecture, a student came up to him and said, "Professor, in an old textbook, I found an interesting problem. We've never done this before. Maybe you can help me solve it." The professor happily agreed. He was so obsessed with science that solving that particular problem seemed the easiest thing to do. And on top of that, he was curious to look at a textbook he didn't know about. The professor promised to help and took the textbook home. In the evening, he remembered his promise. He read the problem and prepared a piece of paper to write down the solution. He was sure it wouldn't take him more than 10 minutes. However, even after more than half an hour, there was still no solution. The professor was getting stressed and convinced himself that it would be done soon. But even after 3 hours, nothing had changed. The next morning, the professor came to the university in a very bad mood. The only thing that occupied his mind was that math problem. He was writing various solutions day and night, but still nothing worked. It's been a day, 2, a week. The professor suffered so much because of the problem's unknown solution that he even got sick. But even in bed, he kept looking for a solution. His eyes were red because of insomnia, and his hands were shaking because of tension. One day, a colleague, a philosophy teacher, came to visit him. When he saw his friend's state, he was terrified. Having found out the true reason for the professor's sickness, the philosopher said, "You know, I'm not a mathematician, and I don't think I can help you with your problem. But I do have some advice. Stop thinking about it, and the decision will come to you." The professor objected, but their conversation moved on to other topics and then stopped altogether. The professor fell asleep for the first time in almost 10 days. The philosopher smiled and left quietly to avoid waking up his colleague. In the morning, the professor woke up rested and healthy. "It's been a long time since I've felt so good," he thought. A minute later, he took a quick look at the textbook. After a moment, the professor grabbed a piece of paper and wrote the solution right away. This time, it finally worked out. He put aside the solution, feeling incredibly happy, and remembering yesterday's conversation with the philosophy professor. And he said to himself, he was right. The more you try to find the solution, the more you distance yourself from finding it. Same in life. You shouldn't worry about the problem that you can't solve right away. Take a break, let it go, and the solution will come to you.